Mark of the Beast, Part 16, Gaia. So far in our series about modern idolatry, we have stressed that idol worship is a means to an end. The goal of the idol pushers is not for you to join them in their precious, occult, religious ceremonies, but rather for them to consolidate power and control over money, information, and your mind. We have seen that the idol is merely the bait which disguises their hook. While we might think that only the heathen would fall for such cheap, shiny bait as idols, we should examine ourselves to be sure that we are not going with the flow along the wide river of destruction within a school of fool fish. It may not be long, after all, before we are swept up in the human current and herded into the same situation that Daniel's friends found themselves in. Bow down and worship the image, or be killed. Bowing down to sculptures, performing mock human sacrifices, worshipping in groves, and meeting secretly in tombs might seem like savage rituals of past civilizations. But this series has shown that they are still done by the elites of our day. This should not come as a surprise to Bible readers, who will find that latter-day prophecy in Ezekiel 37, verse 23, tells us that idol worship will still be rampant right until the end. In Revelation 13, verse 15, states that forced image worship, the worship of the image of the beast, will take place, just like under Nero and Nebuchadnezzar. Our series hopes to describe the idol pushers who are erecting the image of the beast, so that we may know where to draw the line and say, "We will not serve your gods, or worship the golden image which you have set up." John D. Rockefeller III famously said of environmentalism, quote, "We have to make it like a religion." Proud communist Mikhail Gorbachev flatly stated at the Earth Summit that it would be religious right from its beginnings in Rio, 1992. Quote, "I envisage the principles of the Earth Charter to be a new form of the Ten Commandments. They lay the foundation for a sustainable, global Earth community." Compare the goals of the Earth Charter with the mysterious and creepy Georgia Guidestones, another Ten Commandments that was covered in a previous section, and you'll understand the full, malevolent plan of the all-knowing, all-controlling, all-powerful, one-world, technocratic dictators. World religion is one of the United Nations' main preoccupations, because they understand to what extent the diversity of religions keeps the people of the world divided. To have world unity means putting aside the ancient traditions that keep us apart. New Age scientific religions, like world pantheism, attempt to fix that rift in an ecumenicist's dream. According to the World Pantheism's website, quote, "Nature is the very heart of our spirituality, which is close to deep ecology, Gaia theory, nature religion, or basic and direct nature worship. The simplest way to sum it up is in Mikhail Gorbachev's phrase, "Nature is my God." This sacred earth is our ark. We recognize that our planet, the habitat of all living things, is a delicate network of interacting elements. This interaction has been described using the metaphor of the Greek earth goddess, Gaia. Our president and founder, Dr. Paul Harrison, holds a United Nations Environmental Program Global 500 award for his many books on the environment and has edited UNEP's annual report on the world environment for the past 4 years. While caring for and respecting the earth is, of course, a moral obligation, tree worship, nature worship, and Mother Earth worship all combine into an easy-to-sell pagan soup du jour. People have been worshipping trees so long that it is practically in our genes. In an effort to make environmentalism into a religion, they hijack Christianity while combining it with paganism. Gorbachev's Green Cross organization looks a lot like the symbol for Christ. And the Earth Charter Initiative dove icon looks a lot like the Holy Spirit which descended upon Christ. We see other symbols as well, like the Ark and God being replaced by Gaia. Earth worship, the way that the United Nations Environmental Panel sees it, means that moral people of the earth will make some sacrifices in order to take one step further and preserve the planet. Reading from harmonywithnature.un.org, we see that the earth is not at the center of the universe, but, quote, neither are we humans at the center of the earth. We need to devise a new world, and we need to have harmony with nature based on a non-anthropocentric relationship with nature. Part of this new non-anthropocentric or non-human-centered philosophy involves moving people from the countrysides and the suburbs into smart cities, as is shown in their suggestive map, the Global Biodiversity Assessment Map from the United Nations Environmental Panel, where people should only live in the white areas and the rest should be reserved for rewilding. And there isn't much white on that map, which means the cities are going to be pretty densely packed as smart cities. Thomas Jefferson famously said that cities are a threat to the health, wealth, and liberties of man. Cities also do not have good reputations throughout the scriptures. The Edom-Sodom agenda of Agenda 2030 being pushed by the United Nations involves rewilding the countryside, in other words, putting animals on a higher priority than humans, while at the same time cultivating the sinful anonymity that the city provides. At its core, the new environmental religion is anti-human, and that alone should make it a common enemy for all people who want a pro-human future, whether you are religious or not. As disillusioned Greenpeace co-founder Patrick Moore says, quote, Greenpeace went from being humanitarian to anti-human. It might be tempting at first to believe that anyone preaching environmentalism has to be a moral person. It might sound incongruent to suspect environmental billionaires to be perhaps hatching nefarious plans. But if you look at it, environmentalism has a long sordid history going back to paganism in the Middle Ages, and it was punctuated recently by Heinrich Himmler of the Third Reich, who promoted the idea of getting back to the land, this great leap forward, this return to the nature, the spirituality involved in the blood and the soil. He endeavored to have huge naturopathic medicine factories and farms as part of the Nazi program, and studied organic foods and naturopathic medicine. They had great veneration for the forests and worshipped nature and the gods and goddesses of nature. The anti-human sentiments that environmentalism brings to the surface remind us of the ancient pagans and their child sacrifice. Child sacrifice is an aspect of idolatry not yet discussed in our series, and it seems like yet another remote horror of the past that is irrelevant to our discussion of modern-day idolatry and the worship of the image of the beast and its mark. However, as we'll see, this aspect of idolatry is alive and well in the agenda of the modern idol pushers. Infanticide, abortion, sterilization, birth control, population control, democide, eugenics, social engineering, and psychological guilt are all heavily sponsored tools used through the media, schools, churches, and world government organizations that ensure that the legacy of child sacrifice continues to this day. It is difficult to imagine for us in our modern day that the Canaanites sacrificed their children to Baal and Moloch. We might guess that this behavior was an outlier on the graph of history. However, cursory research reveals that it occurred throughout the Middle East, and in England, and in Europe, and the Americas. One could even argue, as a matter of fact, that this trend was almost an inevitability among advanced people. It is important to point out, however, that the religion of Abraham bucked this trend. The story of Isaac graphically illustrates the emergence of a new loving God who says, "Do not lay your hand on the lad," and has a ram sacrificed instead. But outside of the Hebrew religion, human sacrifice was normal. The logic would have gone something like this. Mother Nature, the earth goddess, provides so much for us, and we cannot ever hope to pay her back. So as a sign of our gratitude and humility, we need to pay homage through self-sacrifice. This year, the honor falls on your family's newborn. Perhaps as ancient societies got more decadent, these ceremonies may have served a more practical purpose. child sacrifice may have been a convenient way to get rid of unwanted, illegitimate babies who were conceived following the holiday orgies. Lucky for us, in the modern civilized world, infanticide is no longer practiced. Right? Wrong. Consider this New York Times article from January 18th, 2020, talking about modern China. Quote, "The communist regime bears a heavy burden of guilt for the one-child policy. Forced abortions and sterilizations and infanticide were required or encouraged." Interestingly, it is not just power-hungry or brainwashed communists in backward, underdeveloped countries who are engaged in mass child sacrifice. The article goes on to say that, quote, "Alongside that communist guilt, there is a Western guilt as well, because the one-child policy was linked to a project hatched by Western technocrats, funded by Western institutions, and egged on by Western intellectuals. A classist, sexist, racist, anti-religious program that sought to defuse a population bomb that we now know would have diffused itself without forced sterilization programs in India and signs in Chinese villages saying, 'You can beat it out, you can make it fall out, you can abort it, but you cannot give birth to it.'" The idea for this horrific population control that has now backfired did not come from twisted, sadistic dictators like those in China. It originated from the charitable Unesco, United Nations, the Rockefeller Population Council, Cold Springs Harbor, and Planned Parenthood. Famous people like Julian Huxley, David Rockefeller, Margaret Sanger, Bill Gates Sr., and many more happen to be the same Western technocrats who gather in groves to worship in front of idols. They are the self-proclaimed saviors who think evolution created them and will grant them eternal life if they can dictate their scientific utopia on time. Before that great day can occur, however, a cleanup must be done. Quoting from Unesco's Purpose and Philosophy, "At the moment, it is probable that the indirect effect of civilization is dysgenic instead of eugenic, and in any case it seems likely that the dead weight of genetic stupidity, physical weakness, mental instability, and disease-proneness, which already exist in the human species, will prove too great a burden for real progress to be achieved. Thus, even though it's quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake, so that much that is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable." When they say informing the public mind about the issues at stake, what they mean is selling the idea of eugenics and population control. This means selling the overall idea of overpopulation. 50 years ago, the idol pushers manufactured a crisis called the population bomb, so that they would have a global problem to make their global solution seem more attractive. Paul Ehrlich, the author of The Population Bomb, 1969, was chosen to be an instant United Nations celebrity as he prophesied worldwide about the doomsday to come. The problem, he said, was worldwide exploding population and pollution. The reaction should be panic and fear. And the solution that they'll bring in? Population control through a one-world scientific dictatorship. Along with birth control and sterilization, Paul Ehrlich openly advised for the spiking of Africans' food with sterilants. This is from the New York Times, 1969. Paul Ehrlich's ideas were not groundbreaking at all. In fact, he was merely picking up the torch from previous population control advocates Julian Huxley, Fabian Socialist Bernard Shaw, who is famous for advocating for death panels in the 1930s, and Malthusianism's founder, Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus was actually looking around him way back in the 1790s and warning, "The pie is only so big. There are too many mouths to feed." Instead of seeing people as a resource who can each create more than they consume, he saw people as a disease. None of Malthus's predictions came true, and none of Paul Ehrlich's predictions came true either. But Ehrlich simply breathed out bigger lies, doubling down and lacing his rhetoric with very typical anti-God, anti-family vitriol. Nowadays, informed researchers realize that the population explosion was not a cause for panic, but merely a result of innovations in sanitation, which lengthened lifespans, which caused the temporary overlap of generations that are now living longer. Unless lifespans drastically increase again, the number of people on the planet will soon stabilize, as record numbers of people will die of old age. So after 50 years of promoting population explosion panic, even the New York Times now admits, quote, "The population bomb fizzled, and while its Malthusianism endures around the edges of environmentalism, mostly the population control crusade is recalled as a mistaken extrapolation, a well-meaning mistake. Like the United States and most developed countries, China has a birth rate that is well below replacement level." Yes, as it turns out, the population crisis was a, quote, "well-meaning mistake" that just so happened to sacrifice millions of lives. And the population crusade was recalled, but the truth of it is getting out very slowly, especially, quote, "around the edges of environmentalism." The media, the universities, and other cultural propaganda outlets may have abandoned the population bomb, but they've taken up the recent notion that our carbon footprint is the real problem. Bill Gates gives TED lectures that spell out the importance of reducing the population if we ever hope to save the Earth. According to his brand of Earth worship, it is no longer actual pollution that is the devil. It is carbon dioxide, and more specifically, the humans that exhale carbon dioxide. Prior to this recent war on carbon, there was actually cause for optimism for people who wanted to see a reduction of pollution. Lead had come out of automobile fuel. Rivers and oceans were protected from dumping, and coal smokestacks had been equipped with filters and scrubbers. With actual toxic pollution being mitigated, the creation of a new global crisis became critical. So the latest invisible boogeyman is carbon dioxide, a non-poisonous gas that plants love. Carbon dioxide generators are actually sold online to greenhouse owners who want their plants to grow stronger and faster. A statement by Dr. Frederick Seitz, former president of the National Academy of Sciences, a statement which 18,000 scientists signed, said, quote, "There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing catastrophic heating of Earth's atmosphere. Moreover, increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural planet and animal environments of the Earth." End quote. So why would the United Nations Environmental Panel and all the big corporations want to limit CO2? Don't they know that higher CO2 will grow healthier plants, thereby reducing the scarcity that Malthusians worry about? The answer to that question is that reducing scarcity is bad for business. For example, the scarcity of oil was one of the most valuable lies that kept OPEC and its allies on top of the world's economy, known as the petrodollar, for a century or more. According to Big Oil's heavily funded experts in the 1980s, there was only so many dinosaurs in the earth, and the scarcity made oil into black gold. Cheap energy and cheap staple foods is bad for business. And now that their fossil fuel scarcity lie has been proven false, a new energy scarcity must be imposed. This time, it will be forced through law. Soon, instead of "there's only so many dinosaur bones," it will be "there's only so much energy allotted to you in order to save the planet." No longer the petrodollar. This new system is called the carbon stock exchange, complete with carbon taxes and carbon credits, reminiscent of medieval indulgences. This might sound like science fiction, but this new system was actually contrived back in the 1930s and is called technocracy. A thin disguise for totalitarianism, the goal of technocracy is to, quote, "register on a continuous 24-hour day basis the total net conversion of energy, in order to mathematically figure out the amount of physical wealth available in the form of consumable goods and services for consumption by the total population." End quote. In other words, measure everything and divide it amongst everyone. The socialist system would, quote, "provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption, and the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. When Elon Musk's grandfather and Justin Trudeau's father were preaching hard for technocracy back in the 1960s, it might have seemed like a far-fetched dystopic nightmare to be able to tabulate every individual's energy usage. But today, we're only perhaps a year or so away. Smart meters, smart phones, smart cars, and smart cities promise the vision that technocracy saw. And the corporations are on board. Websites like Bloomberg's The Technocrat teach businesses how to merge with big government for the best chance to monopolize the global surveillance that will be needed for this socialist system. Naturally, all the Council on Foreign Relations connected megacorporations are founding members of the Carbon Stock Exchange. Ford, Toyota, British Petroleum, JP Morgan, Citibank, Rothschild, Australia, etc. They're all working closely with government to speak with a united environmental voice. The idle pushers know that being tracked and traced and given a carbon allowance for everything you eat, everywhere you travel, and every unit of energy you use does not sound like utopia to most people. So the idle pushers have devised a way to use guilt, religion, and old-fashioned paganism to convince people to go green. These emperors' new clothes tailors have a Babylonish garment that fits people just right. It goes something like this. Mother Earth is hurting. She's so sad. And it's on account of you, having too many kids, using up too much oxygen, driving too many places, eating too much meat, and even using too much water. If you would just go ahead and confess your environmental sins and pay some carbon credits to an international peace organization, change your behavior, and make a couple of sacrifices, maybe choose not to have so many babies, that would make Mother Earth really happy. This twisted logic may sound silly to some people, but it's quite reasonable to anybody educated in the public universities in the last 20 years. Recall from part 4 of this series that the definition of a god is a society's ultimate concern. Our Western society's ultimate concern, thanks to relentless weather porn propaganda, has become the climate crisis. If our God, then, is equivalent to our ultimate concern, then saving the earth has become our God. And to save the earth, or to worship, we have been sold the religion of environmentalism. Environmentalism is a zeitgeist, a movement, a spirit of the age. In previous sections, we've discussed how idle pushers hijack institutions and groups in order to deceive through propaganda and conjure up what we called an egregore, or a zeitgeist, or a mob spirit, in order to unleash it on the existing order and effect change over society. Environmentalism, as it turns out, is an excellent example of this egregore maneuver. In his handbook for revolutionists called Rules for Radicals, longtime social activist Saul Alinsky gives advice on how to get folks moving. Quote, "Remember, once you organize people around something as commonly agreed upon as pollution, Then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. And this is a very clever maneuver. After all, who could possibly be against fighting pollution? No one. We all want to reduce pollution and take care of the earth. However, we must not fall for the shiny bait and get swept up with the people on the move. The mob is moving toward another Bolshevik revolution, driven by the same one-world, anti-God Marxist idol pushers who have enslaved people throughout history. We are on the verge of a global transformation, said pro-communist environmentalist David Rockefeller, proponent of the Earth Charter. All we need is the right major crisis. As if in answer, Mikhail Gorbachev predicted at the Earth Summit in Rio 1988 that, quote, the threat of environmental crisis is the international disaster key to unlock the New World Order. I believe that the New World Order will not be fully realized unless the United Nations and its Security Council create structures which are authorized to impose sanctions and make use of other measures of compulsion, end quote. In other words, this environmentalism will be forced on people of the world. A proud communist, Mikhail Gorbachev was entirely on board with the UN's environmental agenda, which they describe as, quote, a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced, a major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals. Every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Even if we choose to believe that carbon dioxide and population density are indeed real threats to the Earth, we still need to understand that hijacked environmentalism is the machinery that is erecting the new Babylon-headed image of the beast. The idol pusher's new agenda is called Agenda 2030 and makes many bold promises reminiscent of the Rosicrucian utopia, which is half of a millennium old. They promise clean environment, fixed climate, no crime, a lot less people, fairness, equality, peace, no racism, no discrimination, one language, one religion, wilderness preserved, improved health, improved diversity, equality of income, equality of education, equality of wealth, and no disease. These sound like goals we would all like to see come to pass, but caveat emptor. The Bible says, there is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Historical examples show us that the side effects and the trade-offs that come with this prescription of 2030 agenda are essentially the same side effects that you would get from an invading army. In our next section, we will see how this new environmental religious dogma has already challenged and replaced true religions, and how that new dogma is really just the same Asherah Grove paganism they have always used throughout ancient history. So join me next time as we look at Mark of the Beast Part 17, The Green Reset.